She missed her flight to help a frail old man no one else would touch. What she didn't know was he owned the airline. Stranded and broke, Fiona Willmore thought she'd made a mistake. But that one selfless moment in a crowded airport would unlock a future she never imagined, turning a forgotten traveler into the woman who redefined compassion in corporate America. Because sometimes, missing the flight puts you exactly where you're meant to land. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The automatic glass doors of Lincoln International Airport slid open with a sigh, and Fiona Willmore stepped inside, swallowed instantly by the hum of humanity. Her sneakers were scuffed, her jeans threadbare at the knees, and the faded strap of her backpack dug into her shoulder. She carried no suitcase. Everything she owned fit in a canvas bag that smelled faintly of coffee and desperation. She paused just beyond the entrance, blinking against the sterile airport lighting. Her eyes scanned the overhead signs, squinting toward Terminal C. A crumpled boarding pass, printed the night before at a hotel lobby printer, fluttered in her hand like a leaf caught in indecision. Her heart thumped with anxious rhythm. Gate C-17. 5:45 p.m. She looked at the large digital clock mounted on the wall above the ticketing counters. 5:32 p.m. Her stomach turned. Plenty of time, she muttered under her breath, forcing her feet to move. Her voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. She'd spent the night before on a stranger's sofa, a friend of a friend who'd offered a floor and nothing more. The job interview had gone poorly, the manager unimpressed by her soft-spoken answers and worn resume. She hadn't told her mother any of this. What could she say? "Hi, Mom. I flew to another state to be told I'm too plain and underqualified. Hope dinner's ready when I get home." She tightened her grip on the boarding pass and kept walking. The airport was a blur of motion and noise. Rolling suitcases, beeping carts, children whining, intercoms crackling with announcements that no one seemed to hear. Fiona passed clusters of business travelers typing furiously on laptops, couples arguing in whispers, and flight crews standing tall in perfectly pressed uniforms. She moved like a ghost among them, unnoticed. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that had been a bruised apple from a corner store. She glanced at the cafe tucked between two gates, the scent of cinnamon rolls and espresso tugging at her like a childhood memory. Her hand instinctively went to her jeans pocket and felt the folded bills. Exactly $27, just enough to get a bus home from the airport when she landed. Food was not an option. Final boarding call for Flight 7245 to Atlanta, Gate C-17. A woman's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Fiona broke into a jog. She weaved between passengers dragging roller bags behind them like iron chains, her breath short, her eyes fixed on the blue and white gate signs. Each second mattered. This wasn't just a missed flight if she failed. It was a night sleeping on an airport bench, maybe longer. She didn't have the money to rebook. There were no second chances. As she turned a corner, the terminal opened into a wide atrium filled with glass and late afternoon light. Gate C-17 was just ahead, the line still long. Relief flooded her. She slowed, catching her breath, wiping sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her hoodie. She'd made it. People in line were restless. A man checked his watch. A woman scrolled through her phone with practiced boredom. The gate agent called for final boarding, and the crowd began to compress toward the jet bridge. Fiona stepped into line behind a mother with a crying toddler, her heart beginning to settle. And then a sound. Thud. Soft but distinct. Followed by a pause. Then a murmur. A groan. Not pain, more like disgust. A few eyes turned. A few didn't bother. Something behind her had fallen. Fiona hesitated. She turned. At first, she didn't see anything unusual. The stream of travelers pressed forward, heads down, minds elsewhere. Then she spotted him. An old man, maybe in his 80s, sat awkwardly on the cold floor a few feet behind the line. His cane had slipped from his grip, and lay beside a tumbled duffel bag. His hat, an old wool cap with a crooked patch, had landed askew on the tile. He looked lost, not just in place, but in thought. Like the world had moved a little too fast, and he'd finally stopped trying to catch up. People passed him without slowing. One woman stepped over the cane as if it were trash. A man pulled his daughter closer, murmuring, "Watch your step." Fiona stood frozen, torn. The gate agent announced again, "Final call. This is the last group for boarding." Her boarding pass crinkled in her grip. She looked back at the old man who was now attempting, and failing, to hoist himself upright. His hands trembled. His eyes darted, embarrassed, as though apologizing for existing. Fiona took a breath. Just one. Then stepped out of line. The carpet beneath her feet shifted from rough to smooth tile as Fiona stepped away from the gate line. She heard a scoff behind her, someone irritated that she'd moved against the flow. But she didn't look back. The old man still struggled. One knee planted on the floor, he clung to the edge of a pillar, trying to find the leverage his arms no longer had. His cane, matte black and chipped at the handle, lay just out of reach. The duffel bag had spilled open slightly, revealing a stack of paper napkins, a single slipper, and what looked like a sandwich in wax paper. It had been carefully packed. Now it was exposed and ignored. Fiona knelt beside him. "Sir?" she said gently, her voice cutting through the blur of voices and intercoms. "Let me help you." He flinched slightly, startled. His eyes, pale, watery, lifted to hers. A blink. Then a flicker of recognition, of surprise. Not at who she was, but at the simple fact that someone had stopped. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, voice barely more than a whisper. "Damn thing slipped right out of my hand." "No need to apologize," she said, reaching for his bag and gently gathering its contents. She tucked the sandwich back in and zipped the bag shut. "Let's get you seated." She found his cane and offered her arm. He hesitated, then gripped her elbow with surprising steadiness. As she helped him to his feet, she noticed the weight of him. Lighter than he looked, as if the years had taken more than. Muscle. His coat hung loosely, a size too large, and his skin was a pale lattice of age spots and veins. "There we go," she said as he steadied himself. He exhaled a shaky breath, then offered her a sheepish smile. "Guess these old bones don't know they're not 30 anymore." Fiona smiled back. "You're doing just fine." A row of benches sat across from a window overlooking the tarmac. She guided him there, ignoring the stares of the passengers still in line, and the gate agent's third and final boarding announcement. As they sat down, the old man eased into the seat with a sigh of relief. Fiona crouched to place the bag beside his feet, then stood up, brushing her knees. "I'll go let someone know you're okay," she said, already glancing toward the counter. His hand gently caught hers. "Don't rush." She turned back, caught off guard by the quiet insistence in his voice. "You already missed it, didn't you?" She blinked. Her gaze flicked to the now-closed gate. The last passenger was walking down the jet bridge. The agent had disappeared behind the desk. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Yeah, I guess I did." His eyes softened. "I'm sorry for that." She waved it off, a weak laugh escaping. "You don't need to be. I've missed worse." He studied her for a long moment. "You remind me of someone," he said after a pause. "My wife long ago. She used to say people were like coins. Most are dull and handled. But every now and then you find one that still shines." Fiona didn't know what to say to that. "Do you have someone waiting for you at home?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just my mom. And probably a pile of laundry." He chuckled. "She's lucky to have you." Silence stretched for a beat. Outside, a plane rolled down the runway. Fiona watched it ascend, the body tilting toward the clouds, the sky swallowing it whole. That could have been her ride out. Her ride back. "Do you have a flight coming up?" she asked. He nodded. "In about an hour. I always come early. Habit, I suppose." She noticed his shoes then, old leather, polished but worn. Not the kind you see on tourists. And his coat, it was old-fashioned. Tailored, but aged like the rest of him. Something about him didn't quite fit. But he smiled at her like someone who had known a great many things and chosen to forget most of them. "I'm Fiona, by the way." "Pleasure, Fiona," he said, and offered his hand with a slight shake. "Call me Charles." A crackle from the intercom echoed overhead. A new flight, a new gate, another crowd moving with urgency. But Fiona and Charles remained still, two still points in the shifting storm of strangers. In that moment, Fiona felt oddly grounded, like missing the flight had anchored her to something more real than a destination. And though she didn't know it yet, the story was just beginning. Fiona sat beside Charles as the terminal pulsed around them, a living machine of announcements, wheels on tile, and tired sighs. The airport had its own kind of time, not measured in hours but in departures, in missed connections, and in waiting. Charles leaned his cane against the bench and let his hands rest on his lap. They were veined, weathered hands, the kind that had fixed things, held babies, or maybe written letters before emails existed. His knuckles were knotted with age, but they didn't tremble now. Not as much. Not with someone sitting beside him. Fiona's phone buzzed inside her hoodie pocket, but she didn't check it. Whatever text or email was waiting could wait a little longer. Her thoughts lingered on the gate she'd just abandoned, the door that had literally closed behind her. There was no announcement for her anymore. No standby, no rebooked flight. Just this bench, this quiet old man, and the distant hum of jet engines somewhere she couldn't follow. "Are you cold?" she asked suddenly. Charles looked at her, surprised. "A little." Without thinking, Fiona pulled off her hoodie, revealing the faded gray t-shirt she wore underneath, and draped the soft fabric around his shoulders. It looked ridiculous on him, far too small and casual against his old-fashioned coat. But he smiled as if she'd wrapped him in mink. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." They sat for a moment in comfortable silence. From her backpack, Fiona pulled out a half-empty bottle of water and a protein bar she'd been saving. She hesitated, then placed the bar on the bench beside him. "If you're hungry." Charles gave a soft laugh. "You're giving away your last rations?" She shrugged. "Let's call it a shared picnic." He didn't take the bar right away, just studied her again. She was used to that look, the one people gave when trying to figure out how someone like her was still standing. Her clothes didn't match, her shoes were nearly 2 sizes too big, donated by a local church after her last pair tore open during a rainstorm. Yet something in her always made people pause. A stillness, maybe. A readiness to see others when most people looked through them. Charles eventually took the bar, unwrapped it slowly. "Tell me, Fiona," he said, chewing thoughtfully. "What's waiting for you at the other end of that flight you missed?" She hesitated. The question wasn't complicated, but the answer felt heavier now. "Just home. My mom. Some bills. No job." She laughed softly. "The usual stuff dreams are made of." He smiled at her sarcasm. "I had an interview," she added, looking down. "Didn't go great. They said I lacked presence. Whatever that means." Charles frowned. "Means they weren't smart enough to see what was in front of them." She glanced at him. "You always this encouraging to strangers?" "Only the ones who stop to help me when I fall flat on my behind in the middle of an airport." That earned a real smile from her. She watched him sip the last of the water, then tuck the protein bar wrapper into his bag as if it were something worth saving. There was something about his movements, deliberate, thoughtful, patient. Like someone used to watching time pass from the edge, rather than chasing it. "I'm surprised no one helped you sooner," she said. "I mean, it's an airport. People everywhere." Charles nodded slowly. "People see what they're taught to see. An old man in the way? That's an inconvenience. Not a story." She looked at him. "A story?" she asked. He met her eyes with a strange kind of calm. "Everyone here is rushing toward something. A meeting. A reunion. A beach. But you stopped. That's rare." Fiona was quiet for a moment. Her gaze drifted back to the gate. The counter was dark now. The flight long gone. "Sometimes I think I move too slow for this world," she said. "Always late. Always just behind the door when it shuts." Charles gave her a look that almost made her heart pause, like he saw something true behind her words. Maybe, he said. You're not behind at all. Maybe you're exactly where someone else needed you to be. A lump rose in her throat, uninvited. She blinked quickly and smiled through it. That's a nice way to look at missing a flight. No, Charles replied gently. That's the right way. The intercom called out a boarding group for a new flight on the opposite side of the terminal, and the seats around them began to clear. Fiona didn't move. She sat beside a man she'd known for less than 15 minutes and felt more seen than she had in months. Not for what she lacked, but for the simple, quiet presence she offered. And though she didn't yet know who Charles really was, he knew exactly who she was becoming. The terminal was quieter now. The late flights were mostly boarded, and the bursts of activity had shifted to distant gates. Overhead, announcements sounded with less urgency, and the rhythm of the airport slowed. A lull between tides. Fiona sat still beside Charles, hands tucked beneath her thighs. Her breath moved slowly in her chest, but the weight in her stomach grew heavier with each passing minute. She glanced at the screen mounted above the gate across from them. The departure time for Flight 7245 had been replaced by a bold red word. Departed. No delay. No gate change. No miracle. It was gone. She looked away. Charles noticed. Is it hitting you now? He asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened before the words could come. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. It was my only ticket home. The reality landed like cold water. No one was coming to help. There was no travel insurance, no flexible fare policy. Her ticket was non-refundable, non-transferable, non-everything. She had spent 3 hours online comparing prices, praying the price wouldn't spike between clicks. She'd stretched $20 and a miracle to make it happen. And she'd let it go. Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't cry in front of a stranger. I'm sorry, Charles said again, but his voice was different now. Less apologetic, more unsettled. Like he wasn't used to seeing someone choose loss so quietly. Fiona shook her head. Don't be. You needed help. You needed a way home. She gave a dry laugh. Well, I guess we both missed something today. She leaned back against the cold plastic of the seat and looked up at the ceiling. The lights above them buzzed faintly. Beyond the tall glass windows, a plane lifted into the sky, its nose piercing the clouds with mechanical grace. That could have been her. That should have been her. I'm so tired of always choosing the hard thing, she whispered. Charles tilted his head. I don't mean helping people, she clarified quickly, ashamed of how bitter she sounded. I mean, I'm always the one who gives up the last piece of cake, who doesn't push ahead in line, who apologizes when someone bumps into me. And what do I have to show for it? A missed flight, an empty bank account, and a backpack that smells like vending machine cheese. He chuckled softly at that last part. She went on. Everyone says kindness matters, right? But then the world runs past you if you slow down to be decent. It punishes you for caring. Silence stretched between them. Then Charles spoke. Or it doesn't. Not always. Fiona turned to look at him. Sometimes, he continued, it just waits. For what? For the right moment to show you why it mattered. She stared at him, studying his face again. It was full of the kind of lines you earn through time and listening. Not just age. Experience. He said it not like a dreamer, but like someone who had lived long enough to know the difference between sentiment and truth. Still, the ache in her chest didn't lift. I wish kindness came with return tickets, she said quietly. Charles smiled faintly. It does. Just not the kind printed on paper. Fiona looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped. The skin at her knuckles was dry from washing dishes at her last job, and her palms bore faint calluses from carrying too much too often. She clenched them, then slowly released. A part of her still hoped, absurdly, that maybe the airline had made a mistake, that they'd call her name and offer a spot on a later flight, or that someone from customer service would notice her sitting there and say, "We're sorry. You matter." But airports don't run on fairness. They run on schedules. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Charles asked. She shook her head. I'll figure something out. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded, not dismissively, but respectfully, as if he believed her. The kind of belief you don't get from people who think you're just a tired girl with nothing left but a worn-out backpack. You shouldn't regret what you did, he said. I don't. She meant it. She didn't regret helping him. She never would. But it still hurt. And as the sun dipped low outside the windows, casting long golden shadows across the tile floor, Fiona sat in silence beside the man she had chosen to help, unaware that her choice had already begun to ripple. Far beyond the gate. Far beyond anything she could imagine. Fiona sat back against the hard bench, her shoulders slightly hunched, hoodie-less, chilled. The ache in her back from days of travel had become a dull throb. Her body asked for rest, but her mind refused to settle. She stared at the scuffed floor, at the scratches left by luggage wheels and hurried shoes, the marks of people who had places to be. She was no longer one of them. Beside her, Charles hadn't spoken for a while. He sipped the tea she'd bought him from the vending machine kiosk. Barely warm, weak, sweetened with too much sugar because the creamer button had stuck. Yet he drank it like it came from a porcelain set at the Ritz. Then he cleared his throat. "You missed your flight for me," he said, not as a question, but a quiet statement of fact. Fiona's eyes stayed on the floor. "Yeah," she murmured. There was no anger in her voice. No complaint. Just a weary kind of truth. He turned slightly in his seat to face her. "And you're not asking for anything?" She shook her head. "That's not how it works. You needed help. I was there." He studied her. "You didn't even ask my name." Fiona met his eyes now. "You didn't ask mine." The moment lingered between them, both unexpected participants in a conversation deeper than its words. "I'm Charles," he said again, but this time his voice carried weight. She smiled. "Fiona." He nodded slowly. "Fiona Willmore," he repeated softly, almost like tasting the sound of it. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Something about the way he said it made her pause. "Should I?" she asked, her smile faltering. Instead of answering, Charles reached into the inner pocket of his coat. His movements were deliberate, a little slow, as if he hadn't reached into that pocket in years. He drew out a worn leather wallet, the kind that seemed carved from a different era. He opened it, pulled out a business card, and held it out to her. Fiona took it with hesitant fingers. It was heavy stock. Ivory white. Embossed letters. A deep navy blue logo she recognized instantly. Not because she was familiar with business people, but because she'd stared at the same logo for weeks while scraping together enough for her ticket. Skypeak Airlines. Charles D. Walker. Founder and chairman. Her mouth parted slightly. She looked from the card to the man beside her. Are you serious?" He nodded. She blinked, reading the name again, her brain trying to reconcile the fragile man beside her with the figurehead of a billion-dollar airline. I thought the founder of Skypeak was..." She trailed off, trying to remember a press photo, a stock image. "I don't know. Younger." "I was," he replied simply. Fiona laughed once, more breath than sound. This is a joke, right?" Charles didn't answer. He only smiled, a small, knowing expression that came not from pride but from patience. Her fingers tightened on the card. "But why? Why were you here, alone?" "Struggling." She shook her head, baffled. "You're a billionaire. Titles don't lift luggage," he said softly. "And I stopped using the VIP terminal years ago." Fiona stared at him. "Every month I pass through this airport dressed like this," he gestured to his old coat. "No staff, no announcement. I sit, I wait. And I watch." "Watch for what?" "For how people treat each other when no one's watching." Fiona leaned back slowly. "You're testing them?" He nodded. "Not officially. Not with forms or data. Just quietly. I've seen executives shove past mothers with children. I've seen flight attendants offer an extra meal to a pregnant woman. I've seen people look away when someone needs help. I've seen the rare few who don't. And today," he looked at her, eyes clear. "Today I saw someone give up her only way home. For no reward. For no camera. For a stranger." Fiona said nothing. The words sank into her. Charles leaned forward and lowered his voice. "That flight you missed? It wasn't just a flight. It was mine. My airline. My plane. She stared at him. If I'd wanted, I could have boarded it right then, he continued. But I chose to fall behind. To see if anyone would notice. Fiona's breath hitched. The implications began to click into place, her small act magnified now. Not by who she helped, but by what it revealed. I don't know what to say, she whispered. He reached out and touched her wrist gently. You already said it. When you gave up your place. Silence fell again, but this time it was a charged stillness, the kind that comes before something irreversible. Then a voice interrupted them. Mr. Walker. A woman in a sharp navy blue suit stood a few feet away. Her hair was in a neat bun, and a sleek tablet rested in her hands. She looked out of place in the surrounding terminal, polished, corporate, clean. The car is ready. Charles nodded to her, then turned to Fiona. Come with me, he said. Let's fix your flight. Then he smiled, slowly, like a secret unwrapped. And something more. Fiona stared at Charles. Her body didn't move. Her mind didn't either, not at first. The words he'd spoken still echoed through her like footsteps in a cathedral. Let's fix your flight. And something more. The suited woman waited patiently a few steps away, posture straight, expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised to see Charles, sitting beside a girl in scuffed sneakers and a wrinkled t-shirt. As if this sort of thing happened often. Maybe it did. Charles stood slowly, and Fiona instinctively rose to help him. He smiled, leaning only lightly on his cane now, as if the weight he carried earlier had lifted somehow. Come, he said. I don't believe in delays unless they teach us something. She followed him down the terminal like a traveler in a dream. They moved through the airport with no need for explanation. People parted as they walked, not out of recognition, but out of the quiet authority Charles carried. Not the loud, barking kind that came from status, but the type that made people unconsciously shift to let it pass. The woman in the navy suit led them to a discreet side door near a service corridor. Fiona had never even noticed it before, hidden between vending machines and a charging station. It opened into a quiet hallway, carpeted and warmly lit, a stark contrast from the sterile buzz of the terminal. And at the end of that hallway, an elevator. As the doors closed behind them, Fiona finally spoke. Where are we going? To the lounge, Charles replied. For starters. Sir, the assistant said to him quietly as they ascended, your 6:45 flight has been rescheduled to 8:10. The board was informed. Good, Charles said. Tell Captain Rowley to hold a seat for our guest. Fiona looked over. Wait, what? Guest? He didn't answer, only smiled as the elevator chimed and opened. They stepped into a space unlike anything she'd ever seen. The Skypeak Executive Lounge wasn't just plush. It was cathedral quiet, with leather chairs, wall-length windows, and a scent that seemed distilled from fresh coffee and polished wood. The windows overlooked the runway, and soft jazz played from invisible speakers. People in tailored clothes murmured politely. An attendant appeared instantly, offering drinks. Fiona opened her mouth to decline, but Charles nodded toward her. Champagne for the lady. She blinked. I don't think It's already taken care of. The glass was in her hand before she could argue. The cold stem pressed into her fingers like something from another life. She sat down in a chair that nearly swallowed her whole. Charles took the seat across from her, a small smile on his face, as if he were watching someone about to discover a hidden passage in their own story. She sipped the champagne. It was crisp, floral, completely alien. She laughed under her breath. Is this really happening? Yes, Charles said. And it's not over yet. He reached into a slim leather briefcase that had appeared beside his chair, opened it, and pulled out a folder. It bore the Skypeak logo embossed in silver. He handed it to her. Fiona took it cautiously. Her fingers shook slightly as she flipped it open. Inside, a single-page letter, cream-colored and crisp, printed in perfect serif font. It was a job offer. Corporate Social Responsibility Division. Title: Program Coordinator, Direct Engagement and Human Impact Initiatives. Reporting to Charles D. Walker, Office of the Chairman. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the lines again. Then a third time. It didn't change. The offer was real. A competitive salary. Relocation included. Full benefits. Start date flexible. All of it. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why? Charles leaned forward. Because compassion is rare in business, he said. We build companies on data and profit. But data doesn't bend down to help someone who's fallen. Profit doesn't give up a flight to sit with an old man. He tapped the folder gently. I want you to help us change that. Fiona looked up at him, and this time, she couldn't hold the tears back. They welled quietly, warming the corners of her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. You don't know me, she said. Not really. I know everything I need to know, Charles replied. In 20 minutes, you taught me more about integrity than most resumes ever do. She shook her head, stunned. I don't have credentials. Not for this. You have what matters. He smiled. And we can teach the rest. Silence settled again, not awkward but full. A few minutes later, the assistant returned. Mr. Walker, the plane is prepped. He nodded and stood. Come, he said to Fiona. Let's get you on a better flight. They left the lounge together. When they reached the private boarding gate, there was no crowd. No rush. Just an open door and a steward who greeted them by name. Miss Willmore, he said with a smile. Your seat is 1A. First class. Fiona stepped onto the plane not as a girl clinging to her last dollars, but as someone walking into a story she hadn't expected to be written into. And this time, she didn't board alone. The elevator doors opened with a gentle chime, and the words executive level, corporate floor, lit up in silver above them. Fiona stepped out, heels clicking softly on polished floors, shoes she hadn't owned 2 weeks ago. The carpet beneath her was navy with the Skypeak insignia woven in gold thread, and the air smelled faintly of citrus, eucalyptus, and paper just pulled from a printer tray. She clutched the ID badge clipped to her new blazer like a talisman. Fiona Willmore, Program Coordinator, CSR Department, Office of the Chairman. It still didn't feel real. Less than 2 weeks ago, she'd been invisible in an airport. A traveler of necessity. A ghost drifting between layovers. Now, she rode elevators past marble lobbies, nodded to executives in tailored suits, and opened emails that began with as per Charles's recommendation. She passed a glass-walled conference room where 3 senior executives stood around a whiteboard titled Ethics in Motion. One of the bullet points was her name, under a new initiative called the Willmore Protocol. Charles had insisted. Her first week in the office had been surreal. She'd expected confusion, maybe resistance. But Charles had introduced her personally, not as a token of charity, but as an advisor, someone whose instincts were exactly what the company needed more of. She represents the future, he'd said during her welcome meeting. Not because of her title, but because of her choices when no one was looking. And somehow people listened, because when Charles Walker spoke, the room leaned in. Fiona had her own office now. Modest, sunlit, with a small plant she named Avery after the airport gate she'd never forget. She spent her days researching nonprofits, crafting community outreach plans, drafting proposals that didn't talk down to the people they were meant to serve. She was helping develop policies for customer care and employee treatment, and even had a hand in creating emergency travel vouchers for low-income passengers, so no one else would miss a flight because of $17 and an act of compassion. The irony wasn't lost on her. She still wore the same watch she'd owned in college, scratched, battery low, and she refused to trade her canvas backpack for a leather briefcase. Not because she was stubborn, but because that backpack had sat beside the man who changed her life. It had held her last granola bar. It had been there. One afternoon, as she finalized the first draft of a new program proposal titled The Human Itinerary, Charles appeared in her doorway. He didn't knock. He never did. But his presence always arrived like a quiet breeze that changed the temperature of the room. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the chair across from her desk. Fiona smiled. "Always." He sat, folding his cane beside him like a question mark. "How are you finding your wings?" She laughed softly, still adjusting to altitude. Charles's eyes gleamed. Well said. They sat for a moment in shared quiet. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. Fiona blinked. Regret what? Giving up your flight. She tilted her head, considering. No, she said. I think I was boarding the wrong plane. The universe just rerouted me. He chuckled at that. Then he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. I've built this company on efficiency, on precision. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing the people flying with us as people. You reminded me why we started this in the first place. Fiona swallowed. You would have figured it out eventually. No, he said. Not without you. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. She only smiled and returned her eyes to the proposal on her screen. But his words stayed with her. Later that week, she stood in front of a group of new interns, fresh faces, nervous energy, giving an orientation on the company's community mission. She told them about impact reports, carbon offset programs, inclusive hiring. She spoke clearly, confidently. And just before she finished, she added something off script. Your title will matter less than your timing, she said. So when the moment comes, and it will come, don't step over someone who's fallen. Don't look the other way. She paused. Be the one who stops, even if it costs you something. The interns were quiet, listening, just as she had once. The airport was crowded, humming with life and late flights. A woman stood alone near gate C-17, her coat tucked under one arm, a coffee in the other. She wasn't dressed like a traveler. No suitcase, no passport wallet, no earbuds. Just observant eyes and a clipboard in her hand. Her name tag read, Fiona Willmore, Director, Human Engagement Initiatives. Skypeak Airlines. She had returned to where it began, not for nostalgia but for purpose. Behind her, a discreet team of staff was watching from a distance. New hires from her department shadowing her on what Charles had once called his quiet inspections. But she didn't wear a disguise. She believed in transparency now, not hiding power behind appearances, but wielding it with honesty. She looked around the terminal, letting the memories seep in like light through glass. There, the bench where she'd first sat beside Charles. There, the vending machine that had eaten one of her last dollars. There, the spot on the tile where she'd knelt to help an old man up, without knowing she was stepping into a new life. That moment hadn't lasted more than 15 minutes. But it had become a hinge, a pivot, a quiet revolution that neither she nor the airline saw coming. A nearby announcement echoed. Final boarding call for Flight 7245 to Atlanta, Gate C-17. Her chest tightened, not from panic this time, but memory. She watched as a young mother juggled a stroller and a toddler. A businessman barked into his phone. A teenage girl fumbled nervously with a printed boarding pass. And in the middle of it all, an elderly man dropped his bag. For a second, no one moved. Then a tall boy in a school hoodie stepped forward. Picked it up. Helped him. No cameras. No thanks. Just kindness. Fiona smiled to herself. It was working. She turned and walked back to her team. They would debrief, discuss, adjust. There were policies to shape, flight attendant empathy training to revise, vendor partnerships to vet through ethical lenses. But this was why she came back. One of the interns approached her, holding a survey clipboard. Ms. Willmore, quick question. This story you always reference, about someone missing a flight and meeting Mr. Walker, was that like a legend? Or is it actually true? Fiona looked at the intern, then back at the gate. She smiled. Sometimes a story's truth isn't in whether it happened exactly that way, she said. It's in the change it leaves behind. The intern nodded, unsure, and scribbled something on her sheet. Fiona turned once more to glance at the window, where a plane began its slow pushback from the gate. Its sleek body bore the Skypeak logo, and beneath it, a new tagline she'd helped write. Every journey is human. As the engines roared to life and the wheels began to turn, Fiona Willmore closed her eyes, just for a moment, and let it wash over her. The weight of a choice made not for reward. The life that had bloomed from it. And the quiet power of one moment, one human moment, that changed everything. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.